My name is Audra Finch. I'm 32 years old. For the past 8 years, I've worked as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, and before that, I clerked for a circuit court judge who told me on my last day that I had the sharpest legal mind he'd seen in 20 years of taking clerks. He never said that to my face again, but I wrote it down. I kept it in a drawer under my bed for years, not out of vanity, but because I knew there would be days when I needed proof. My brother's rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant in Connecticut, the kind with exposed brick and a sommelier who introduces himself by his first name and a last initial, like he's on a dating app. The reservation was under my brother's name. There were 40 people there, my family included, and a hand-lettered seating chart on a chalkboard near the hostess stand. My name was not on it. I stood there for a moment, just long enough to memorize the oversight, then found a seat at the end of the bar and ordered sparkling water. Nobody came to get me. My brother Marcus is 4 years older than me and has spent most of his adult life being the family's idea of success. He went to state school on a partial scholarship, graduated with a 3.1, got a job in insurance sales, and within 6 years was managing a regional office in Stamford. My parents talk about this the way other people talk about the moon landing. Mom keeps a framed photo of him at his first company dinner on the mantel in the living room. My law degree from Columbia is in a box in my closet, not because I put it there out of bitterness. I just never got around to hanging it up. When you spend 12-hour days arguing before federal judges, you stop needing the paper to remind you who you are. My sister-in-law Courtney is the kind of woman who sends thank you notes within 48 hours of receiving a gift. She's perfectly pleasant. She likes Pilates and oat milk and has a Pinterest board titled Our Forever Home that she's been adding to since before Marcus proposed. She never did anything overtly cruel to me. She just treated me like furniture, pleasant to acknowledge when you bump into it, easy to forget when you leave the room. At the rehearsal dinner, she gave a toast. She thanked her parents, Marcus's parents, the bridesmaids by name, the florist, the venue coordinator, and the calligrapher who did the chalkboard. She did not mention me. Marcus thanked everyone Courtney forgot and added his college roommate who wasn't even there. He looked right past me twice while scanning the room. I was sitting 8 feet away. After dessert, my mom found me at the bar. She patted my hand and said, "You know how stressed they are. Planning a wedding is a full-time job." Then she went back to her table to finish her creme brulee. I drove back to the hotel alone. I sat on the edge of the bed in my room and stared at the wall for about 3 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and finished a brief that was due the following Monday. That's the thing about being the invisible one in a family. You get very good at filling your own silences. The wedding was at a vineyard in Litchfield County, one of those restored barn venues with string lights and a lawn that slopes down toward a pond. Beautiful, honestly. Courtney had excellent taste, whatever else I could say. I drove up alone, got there 40 minutes early, and walked the grounds before anyone arrived. The air was cool and sharp the way October in Connecticut can be, and the maples were burning orange along the tree line. I stood by the pond for a while and thought about nothing in particular. I was good at that too, turning my mind to a frequency just above static. I was wearing a navy dress I bought for a colleague's retirement dinner the previous spring. Simple, fitted, not remarkable. I thought about wearing something more noticeable, then decided against it. I didn't come to be noticed. Inside I found my seat, table 11, the outer ring of tables near the back wall beside a trellis of dried eucalyptus. The name card was handwritten in Courtney's calligrapher's script, Audra. Just Audra, no last name, as if I were a child who didn't need a surname. This ceremony was lovely. I won't pretend otherwise. Marcus cried a little when Courtney walked in, and whatever I feel about my brother, that was real. He loves her. That part was never the problem. The reception began with cocktails on the lawn. I got a glass of Cabernet and stood near the edge of the crowd and watched people I half recognized from Christmases I'd mostly missed. A cousin asked me if I was still doing the lawyer thing. I said yes. He said, huh, and walked away. I was fine. I was actually fine. I had no expectations walking in, which meant there was nothing to shatter. Then Courtney's maid of honor took the microphone. She was a woman named Bethany, Courtney's college roommate, a real estate agent from Fairfield County, with the energy of someone who's been waiting their whole life to give this toast. She went through the hits. How she and Courtney met freshman year. The trip to Barcelona, the time Marcus showed up outside Courtney's apartment with flowers, even though he's not a flowers guy. Big laughs, knowing nods. Then she said, "Of course, I have to mention the future in-laws who raised the most incredible man." She looked at my parents. Mom beamed, Dad raised his glass, and I know Marcus's sister is here somewhere. She squinted theatrically around the room. The one who works in law, right? Or was it finance? Courtney, which one is it again? Courtney laughed into her champagne flute. I didn't move. Anyway, Bethany continued, we love that you could make it. That was it. That was the acknowledgement. We love that you can make it. Like I was a distant relative who traveled in from out of town, not the defendant's, not the groom's sister who had, 4 months earlier, quietly negotiated her brother out of a tax fraud investigation by calling in a favor with a colleague in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He didn't know I'd done that. Nobody in that room did. But I did. I took a slow sip of my wine. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Marcus. I looked at the centerpiece, which was a cluster of dahlias in muted burgundy, and I counted the blooms because that is the kind of thing I do when I need to stay still. 12 dahlias. I remember exactly. The thing about my work is that it is not the kind of thing that shows up at dinner parties. I don't have a company car, or a corner office, or a bonus that comes in a holiday card. I carry a federal badge and a caseload that averages 22 active files and an inbox I stopped trying to clear around 2019. I have put 3 sitting state officials in federal prison. I have argued before the Second Circuit 4 times and won 3. I have worked cases that appeared in the New York Times with my name attached, though my family has never mentioned reading any of them. I once stayed awake for 36 hours straight to finish a sentencing memo for a human trafficking case, and when it was over, I sat in the parking garage of our office building and cried for 7 minutes, then drove home and slept for 11 hours. Nobody in my family has ever asked what that's like. My mother once told me that she wished I'd gone into family law, because at least then I'd be helping people she could picture. She said this warmly. She meant it as a compliment. At the reception, I sat through dinner beside a man named Gilbert, a friend of Marcus's from his sales days, who spent most of the meal explaining to me how the financial industry actually works. I listened politely. I've successfully prosecuted financial fraud. I didn't mention it. The speeches continued after the entrees. Marcus's best man went next. A long, affectionate roast that earned genuine laughter from the whole room. Then Marcus himself stood. He thanked his parents. He thanked Courtney's family. He thanked the groomsmen by name. He thanked his college coach, who wasn't there. He looked at me once, made brief eye contact, and moved on. He did not say my name. In the body of law, there's a principle called notice. Before any action can be taken against you, you must be formally notified. You must be seen, acknowledged, given the opportunity to respond. It is one of the oldest protections in American jurisprudence. My family had never heard of it, and that was fine. I was not there for the speeches. I was there because something told me I needed to be, a quiet, steady instinct I'd learned to trust. The kind that doesn't explain itself, just plants a foot. I found out 2 weeks after I'd RSVP'd that Judge Caldwell would be attending the wedding. Not just any judge. Harriet Caldwell, Federal District Court, Southern District of New York, appointed under the previous administration, one of the most respected voices in federal criminal procedure in the country. She was also, as it turned out, the mother of Courtney's father's college roommate. which is the kind of 6 degrees connection that only happens in New England at a certain tax bracket. I had argued before Judge Caldwell 3 times. I had won all 3. After the last one, a wire fraud case that had dragged for 2 years, she'd stopped me in the hallway outside her courtroom and said, "Finch, your closing argument is the best I've heard in this building in 5 years. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I had not mentioned this to my family. There was no opening to mention it. The subject of my professional life came up at family gatherings roughly as often as the subject of crop rotation. When I saw Judge Caldwell across the reception hall, standing with a glass of wine near the bar, I felt something shift in my chest. Not excitement, more like recognition. The way you feel when you realize the road you're on is the one you were supposed to be taking all along. I did not approach her. That is not how I operate. You don't walk up to a federal judge at a wedding to make yourself known. That would be embarrassing for both of us. I went back to my table. I poured more wine. I let the evening move. Bethany finished speaking. The best man finished speaking. Marcus finished speaking. Marcus finished speaking without saying my name. Then Courtney's father stood. He was a tall man, silver-haired, a kind of retired attorney who still holds himself like he has a case to try. He spoke about his daughter with genuine warmth. He spoke about Marcus with measured approval. Then he looked around the room with the deliberate sweep of a man who never does anything accidentally. "Before I sit down," he said, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone I had the privilege of speaking with this evening." The room quieted. Most of you know that I practiced law for 30 years before I retired. Mergers and acquisitions, mostly, a long way from criminal prosecution. But I have enough colleagues left in that world to know a name when I hear one. He paused. He looked directly at table 11. Audra Finch is sitting in this room tonight. For those of you who don't know, and I suspect that includes most of her family, Ms. Finch is one of the most decorated federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York. She has personally tried and won cases of a complexity that most attorneys never see in a full career. She argued the Marchetti wire fraud appeal before the Second Circuit last spring, a case that set precedent that every white-collar defense attorney in this city is still trying to figure out how to work around. Someone at a nearby table murmured, "I sat on a panel with Judge Caldwell last fall. Harriet, would you agree that Audra Finch's name has come up more than once?" Judge Caldwell from across the room raised her glass slightly. "More than once," she said clearly. "I just think," Courtney's father continued, voice even, measured, "that when someone of this caliber is in the room should know it." He raised his glass toward me. "To Audra." There was a beat of silence. Then Judge Caldwell raised hers. Then 3 people at her table. Then the bar staff, one of them, a young woman who just set down her tray and raised her water glass with a straight face and did not look away. I sat completely still. My hands were in my lap. I did not smile immediately because I didn't need to perform anything. I just looked at Courtney's father and gave him a single quiet nod. The kind that says, "I see you," and "thank you." And now let's both pretend this cost us nothing. I heard my mother make a sound. I didn't turn to look. Marcus's chair scraped the floor. Courtney's champagne flute was very still in her hand. Bethany, the maid of honor, had stopped smiling. The music picked back up after a moment. The DJ shifted to something low and instrumental, and the room began to breathe again. But the air was different. The air was always different after that kind of moment. Not louder. Rearranged. My mother found me on the lawn during the cocktail portion of the after-party. She was moving with the particular urgency she reserves for conversations she's been drafting for 20 minutes. "You never told us," she said. I looked at her. "About what? The cases. What he said. The circuit court." "You never asked." She opened her mouth. Closed it. The skin around her eyes was tight. I'd seen that look before, but usually it was directed at me in a different way, not this compressed, uncertain look. Not this. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't. She wanted me to say something that would make it easier for her. I could see it. She wanted me to say it was okay, or that I understood, or that families are complicated and we all do our best. I have made that speech so many times, in so many forms, in living rooms and hospitals and family driveways in November, that I have it memorized at this point. I didn't make it this time, Mom, I said, and I kept my voice even, not cold, not cruel, just honest. I've been doing this work for 8 years. The door was always open. She nodded slowly. Her eyes got wet, but she held herself together because she is my mother and she would not cry at her son's wedding reception in front of a tent full of guests. I should have asked more, she said. Yeah, I said. You should have. We stood there for a moment. The pond was dark beyond the lawn, and the string lights caught in the surface of the water, and somewhere behind us the DJ was playing something from the 90s that Marcus loved in high school. My mother reached out and touched my arm. Not a hug, just a hand, the same hand that had pressed against my forehead when I was small and running a fever. The same hand that had pushed me gently toward every door she thought I should walk through, then looked surprised when I found ones she hadn't pointed to. I let her keep her hand there for a moment, then I said I was going inside to get another drink. Marcus found me at the bar around 10:30. He was loosened up, jacket off, the easy version of himself that only comes out after midnight, and a few glasses of scotch. He sat on the stool next to me without asking. Hey, he said. Hey. He turned the cocktail napkin over in his hands. This is what Marcus does when he's about to say something real. He handles objects. He straightens things on tables. He's been doing it since we were kids. Dad says you handled something for me a few months back, he said, with the IRS. I didn't answer right away. A colleague mentioned it to him, he said. Something about a tax discrepancy, a referral that got closed. I took a sip of my drink. I don't know what you're talking about. He looked at me. He knows when I'm choosing words. He's known that about me since I was 14. Audra. Marcus. A pause. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Because you didn't need to know. That's. He stopped. Started again. That's a lot. What you did. It was a phone call. It was, Audra, that could have been serious. It didn't get serious. I set down my glass. That's the whole point. He was quiet for a long time. The bar around us was picking up, the late-night crowd rolling in, and someone was requesting a song from the DJ with the enthusiasm of a person who has consumed 3 cocktails and believes they've just had a revelatory musical insight. You've been doing this your whole life? Marcus said finally. Doing what? Fixing things, quietly. He looked at his hands, without making anyone feel like they owe you. I don't do it so people feel like they owe me. I know. He looked up. That's the part that's hard to sit with. I turned toward him slightly. My brother, who I have not really talked to, not actually talked to in probably 6 years, who I've seen at holidays and who has asked me twice about my job, and both times looked slightly glazed by the second sentence of my answer. You named the seating chart after the bridal party, I said. He winced. Yeah. I had sparkling water at the bar for an hour before someone said hello. I know. He exhaled. I know. Courtney and I talked. There was so much to manage and you were. I was fine, I said. I always seem fine. I know. He looked at me the way you look at something you've walked past every day for years and just now noticed the detail that was there the whole time. I'm sorry, he said. Not a performance. Not a rehearsed apology constructed to make himself feel better. Just 2 words sitting there between us, unadorned. I know, I said. We didn't hug. We're not a hugging family. Never have been. but he picked up his glass and I picked up mine, and we sat there at the bar together for another 40 minutes, and he asked me questions I actually had to think about to answer. Not softball questions, real ones, about the Marchetti case, about what it's like to build a prosecution over 2 years, about how you decide which cases to take on and which ones you have to let go. He listened the whole time. He didn't glaze over. He asked a follow-up question about appeals procedure that surprised me enough that I laughed. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a beginning. And I have worked in criminal law long enough to know that sometimes a beginning is the hardest thing to get. A month after the wedding, I got a letter in the mail. Actual mail, cream envelope, no return address. My name and office address handwritten in a clean, deliberate script. Inside was a note card, 2 sentences. Ms. Finch, it was a pleasure to share a room with someone of your caliber. The Southern District is lucky to have you. H.C. I read it twice, held it up to the window like I was checking for something I might have missed. Then I set it on my desk and got back to the brief I was working on, which was due at 5 and wasn't going to finish itself. But I kept it. It's in the drawer under my bed now, next to the note from my clerkship judge. 2 pieces of paper. That's not nothing, that's a whole record. I still see my family at holidays. Christmas this year was at my parents' house in Fairfield, same as always. Courtney made a butternut squash thing that was genuinely excellent. Marcus asked me about a case he'd read about in the Times, and it took me a second to realize he'd been paying attention. He'd actually been following the coverage. My mother made grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, cut diagonally, the way she's always done. She set one in front of me without being asked. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did I. We are not a family that has been repaired. We are a family that has been interrupted. A family that looked up from the performance it had been running for decades and found someone standing in the corner who had been there the whole time, just not where anyone thought to look. I don't need them to understand everything I do. I'm not sure that's possible, but I need them to know that I exist, not as a peripheral detail in Marcus's story, not as the quiet one who didn't turn out the way anyone expected, just as myself. I spent a long time waiting for someone to see that. I stopped waiting somewhere around 31. I just kept working, kept building the record, kept doing the things that mattered and trusting that eventually the room would catch up. Rooms always do. There's a view from my office on the 14th floor that I never get tired of. Lower Manhattan, the harbor just visible on a clear day, the constant low-grade noise of a city that doesn't stop for anything. I come in early most mornings. Coffee, no sugar. The inbox before anyone else is in. There's something I love about that hour. The stillness before the day accumulates, when everything is still just possibility. Some mornings I think about the rehearsal dinner. The chalkboard with 40 names and not mine. The bar stool. The sparkling water. And then I open the first file and I get to work. Because that is what I do. That is what I have always done. The cases don't care who your family is. The law doesn't care whether you were seated at table 11 or the head table. The work is the work, and I am very good at it. I built that reputation alone, in courtrooms, in depositions, in late-night offices, in parking garages where I allowed myself 7 minutes to fall apart before I drove home. And the thing about a reputation built that way, quietly, without an audience, without anyone holding the door open, is that no one can take it back. Not a seating chart. Not a toast that forgets her name. Not 20 years of being the one who doesn't fit the frame. It belongs entirely to you, and I intend to keep it. I've thought about that night a lot since then. Not obsessively, not with bitterness sitting in my chest the way it used to. More the way you think about a scar after it's fully healed. You press on it occasionally just to confirm it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. What I keep coming back to is this. Nobody in that room did anything to me that I hadn't already been letting happen for years. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. The seating chart with no last name. the toast that treated me like a footnote, the 20 minutes I spent at a bar alone before anyone thought to say hello. None of that was new. I had been allowing myself to be invisible in that family for so long that I had started to mistake it for humility. It wasn't humility. It was resignation dressed up as patience. There's something I've noticed in my work, and I've spent enough years in courtrooms to have noticed a lot, about how consequences operate, not the dramatic, obvious kind. Not the moment the verdict comes back or the sentencing gets handed down. The quieter kind, the way a pattern of choices accumulates over time into something that eventually has to be reckoned with, one way or another. Marcus didn't set out to erase me. My mother didn't wake up deciding to make me feel like a peripheral detail in her own family, but they made choices, small ones, consistently, over a long stretch of years, and those choices added up into something real. Something that showed up in a vineyard in Connecticut on a Saturday night in October and couldn't be undone with a toast or a hand on an arm. What showed up on the other side of that equation was everything I had been building in the same amount of time. Every case, every brief, every hour I stayed when I could have gone home, every time I chose the harder thing because the harder thing was right. I wasn't building it to prove something to my family. I genuinely wasn't. But the work doesn't care about your motivations. It just accumulates the same way the neglect did. Quietly, with interest. Courtney's father standing up that night wasn't luck. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the natural endpoint of a long chain of cause and effect. He knew who I was because I had done the work that made me knowable to people who pay attention to that kind of work. Judge Caldwell raising her glass wasn't a gift. It was a recognition of something I had actually built. You can't manufacture that moment. You can only create the conditions for it, and the conditions take years. I think about Audra at 24 a lot, fresh out of clerking, terrified but too stubborn to show it, eating lunch alone in her office because she didn't want to waste the hour. I want to tell her that the loneliness is temporary, but the work is permanent, that the people who don't see you right now are not the measure of your worth, that the measure of your worth is what you do when nobody's watching. And what you do when nobody's watching is exactly what ends up mattering most. I also want to tell her, and this is the part I wish someone had said out loud, that staying quiet is not the same as being patient, that there is a version of self-sufficiency that tips into self-erasure, and you should learn to know the difference before it costs you a decade. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say out loud what you have done and who you are. That's not arrogance. That's just the truth, and the truth has a right to exist in the room. Marcus asked me real questions that night. That was the beginning. Not the apology. Not the moment the room turned. Just two people sitting at a bar, and one of them finally deciding to look directly at the other. It's not a healed relationship, it's an interrupted one. But interrupted is so much better than over. I'm still working. I'll always be working. That's not going to change. But I walk into rooms differently now, a little less like someone who expects to be forgotten, a little more like someone who built her own table and knows exactly what it's worth. That's not a small thing. That took everything I had to learn,